Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Today it is the 2nd of November, 2022. And on today's show, a big piece of news when it comes to the Big 12 television deal and expansion. We'll give you guys that coming up here. Also a look at the inaugural, or first, at least for this year, college football playoff rankings that came out last night. Where do the Big 12 schools sit? And did one Big 12 school get screwed? All that's coming up on the show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Thank you guys for making us a part of your day. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. We just got over 2,500 subscribers, which is awesome. Let's now push for 3K. So if you guys have not subscribed already, please do. 6 days a week is this show. We talk everything from Big 12 football to television contracts to expansion, everything in between. So make sure you guys subscribe today and find us wherever you guys get your podcasts as well. So today's show was going to be a look at the college football playoff rankings, which is coming, and also a look at the Texas-Kansas State game coming up. We'll do that tomorrow because this crossed my timeline this morning, and it's a very significant piece of Big 12 television news. We've got the kind of the general sense of what this Big 12 television contract is going to be with ESPN and Fox. But one big question I had, and a lot of you all had, was about the potential for adding schools and what financially that would look like. We got some answers today. This comes from Andrew Marchand from the New York Post. This is from the Marchand and Oran Sports Media podcast. Give this a listen right here.
In the ESPN part of the deal, if the Big 12 was to bring schools or a school from a Power 5 conference, there's only one conference that you could probably steal from at this point, that would be the Pac-12. So if they were to bring in a Pac-12 team, then that's when the pro rata comes in, where they would pay just as much per team. They would add that value to what they're paying now. If you brought in, let's say, for example, an Arizona or an Arizona State or Oregon or whomever, they would. So, but this is where it gets interesting. From my understanding, I don't think Fox is in alignment with that. And that makes some sense since ESPN is going to be getting the better games. So if they added better teams, that probably would favor ESPN, even though I guess, the long tail would also help Fox a little bit. So the question is, if that were to happen, what happens, and there's a little bit of some gray area here, and that really affects where college football is going, because if you just add a Pac-12 team and you get the same amount of money, then expansion makes a lot of sense for the Big 12 and potentially for a Pac-12 school. If you're only going to get, let's say, 63% of that 380 with a new team, so 63% of the 380 added, then how does that work?
So first things first, he said pro rata. For those of you guys who are not familiar, pro rata means add, right? So if they were to add an add-on, basically, and I'm not sure what exactly the Latin is. I know we do have some people who are in the law side of things, so I could even look it up now, but pro rata in this case means add. Now, the big difference for this, and we talked about this in relation to the Big Ten deal, the Big Ten's television deal says this, that if they add Notre Dame, it's going to automatically escalate. If they add other teams, there will be a good faith conversation between the league, the Big Ten, and the television partners about what will happen. Now, good faith can mean a lot of different things in different cases. This is different than that. This says explicitly for the Big 12 from the ESPN side of things, which makes it a little bit more complicated, but ESPN will match their portion of what they're paying per school if you add a new one. So let's just say that at ESPN, this is not the exact number, guys. I'm just doing this for the sake of saying this. If ESPN is paying each school what equates to $30 million a year, if they were to add Arizona, Utah, Colorado, or Arizona State, any of those schools, for each one they would add, ESPN would bump up that $30 million. Once again, That is not exactly what they're paying them. We're not sure what the exact figure is from each school to make that total of $380 million a year. But that is the situation. ESPN is holding up that end. They said they will do that per edition of Power 5 school. So I know a lot of you all have said about Navy and SMU and San Diego State and Boise State. And no, they are not going to financially help the conference. At least it does not look like right now. Adding those schools will just tack on more money. And also, I mean, obviously with those, there's more chances to go to bowl games. There's more chances to go to the NCAA tournament, more playoff chances, whatever else is going to throw in there. So it could help out in the back end. There you go. There's that. The holdup is that Fox, who has got a lesser portion of the package, is not agreed to that. So Andrew Marchand said there, look, if both ESPN and Fox were going to match their shares per schools added, the math becomes really, really easy it becomes very easy for these Pac-12 schools, right? If you're Arizona and you know that there's a guaranteed $31.6 million bar, that's the lower level, or that's the TV level you're going to get, that makes that decision pretty easy because you then go and compare what's being offered on the Pac-12 side of things, and you can go and make that decision, all right? But that's not the case. If it were the case, guys, I mean, the Big 12 could be very aggressive in going after these schools. They could be, they probably are now, but they could be extra aggressive in that category. But because Fox is not willing to match, that causes a problem. Now, I don't think Fox, in their hesitance to match, will exclude the Big 12 from going after it. And here is why. Or completely going after it. Here is why. There are some ways, in my opinion at least, I think, to make the money work. Now, I'm not a financial expert, all right? I do not pretend to be. But there are a few ways that you could still make this attractive. Number one, and we've talked about this, is that obviously what you would not do is add an Arizona or Arizona State or Utah or Colorado and make them take less money because it wouldn't be worth it for them to do. What you would do is you would, if you're not getting the full value, let's just say they're promising Arizona, if you add Arizona on, they're going to get $25 million in revenue and everybody else getting 31.6. What you would do is you'd shift money in other schools. Everybody else will take a little bit less to get them to where they have to be, right? To make sure everything is even. So shifting that money around is number one thing you can do. To then number two, and this is where I think it's interesting, and some people might say, no, I don't want my school to take less. Well, how much is the destabilizing of the Pac-12 worth? And once again, it's not something I take pleasure in doing. I don't love talking about the end of the Pac-12. It's not something that makes us all super happy. Some of you maybe, but there are fans of Stanford, and well, not very many, but in Cal and Washington State and Oregon State who love their school and love their programs and love the Pac-12 just as much as we do. And we don't obviously take a lot of pride in trying to, maybe they might, but end this whole thing and try to make it over for the Pac-12, make it a Power 4. But the reason why you could do that is you might take less money on the front end, because if there's no Pac-12 on the back end, and the back end here being in 2031 when this contract expires, the value of the Big 12 has gone up. What is ESPN saying here that they want? They are saying they'll pay equal value for Power 5 teams. So they're still searching for that power. And if you just add 4 more Power 5 teams in 2031, barring that they don't all just completely suck and the conference is still good. And hey, I don't think that's the case. I think the basketball is still going to be great. I think the football is still going to be at a high level. In 2031, you might make more money then, because if you take those 4 schools, there might be one less game in town, and you'd have to, this is going to be on Brett Yormark and the folks of the Big 12. They're going to have to convince Arizona and Utah and Colorado and Arizona State and, maybe even Oregon and Washington. Once again, that one feels maybe unlikely. I mean, I don't know. At this point in time, it does not seem like that the Big Ten is super interested at this moment adding those schools. Now, once again, the death nail is always if the Big Ten just came around and said, sure, we'll add you, that'd be great. That could kill them. But it does feel like that the Big 12, if they could eliminate them that way, they would raise their value then. And I think they could raise their per school value in 2031 or 2029 or whatever it is, whenever they're going to negotiate their next television contract. That would raise their value. So, and that is mentioned in the Oran and Marchand podcast. Folks, if you guys don't listen to them, you don't have to listen to the whole show, but there is a portion of their show that they spend every single week on the Big 12 and the Pac-12 media topics, because I think it does such good numbers for them. I mean, I understand why they do it. So it's a risky move. It's a aggressive move that the Big 12 would have to take. It would involve some short-term loss. You'd probably at that point, you'd maybe say, hey, the distribution might be around, if we think all told, the distribution money-wise is going to be over 50 million, then maybe it settles around 50 to add those additional schools. Who knows, though? Maybe when you jack up the playoff and you jack up the NCAA tournament, I know everybody else is going to get more money too, but that means you are also going to get more money on the back end there. So maybe it'll be profitable there. And those 4 schools are like, yeah, sure. I mean, let's join this league because we'll be part of a 16-team league that could have some really good value, as a 16-team block next time the television contract comes up, and they'd be considered part of the Power 5, right? They'd still be in that mix as part of the Power 5. And then I guess it would jump to a Power 4 type situation. So it's all of this situation that we're talking about here is risk assessment, right? That's all Brett Yormark's been dealing with. Risk assessment, and this has been a big topic, going early for the deal like they did, or going late, right? Or waiting to see what your value was in the back end. It seems like, generally speaking, people believe going early was the right move. So there's one kind of risk you went out there for. I have to think about it longer and harder, and maybe somebody in the chat could tell me here. I have a tough time seeing any downside to aggressively pushing for those 4 schools, because unless a new conference forms, if you add those 4 schools, guys, we're talking about a 6-team league. If you add 2 more schools from the Pac-12, it becomes an 8-team league. And they maybe have to expand there, but really, how much value is there if they're adding a San Diego State and a Boise State or whoever else? There's really not a ton of value there. And is that league much more valuable? So if you got aggressive and you went after some of those schools, I think maybe the Pac-12 going away is once again one of those things that makes the Big 12 more valuable, because there is one less power conference out there now. And while the Pac-12, as its downfall, especially the back end, these TV networks still want Power 5 content. That's the one plus for the Pac-12, right? Is that these TV networks want the Power 5 content. The bad news for them is they want Power 5 schools. Them at this point adding in G5 schools, the Big 12, it seems like they did it at the right time, right? They're still able to get an increase on their revenues. But it seems like, with this pro rata clause, like ESPN specifically is asking for more value in that department. So there is a few ways that you have to do this. Everybody would kind of have to pitch in to help make the difference. Now, I think one part of this too is interesting is I'm not sure when UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF all get paid out in full. Sometimes it's a gradual step up, and I believe that's the way it works when they come here. Once again, have to wait and see. It's a gradual step up in revenue. I'm not sure when it's fully going to get paid out, but maybe you guys could use the difference there until they get there to help pay out some of these schools. But once again, that's the risk they have to calculate. Will they be better off in 2016 if they add these schools now? Because it sounds like you would be taking a short-term financial hit. For us as folks who are excited about the league and its future, sure, we love the sound of more schools. It's great. It expands the profile, and it could be good in the back end. If you're a president or an athletic director at the current Big 12 schools, I'm not going to fault you for thinking about the short-term thing and saying, well, do we want to give away some of the money that we're going to get to add these schools in right now when we could be doing more at the current facilities, and do we necessarily need these schools? So it's an interesting question, but that's the avenue that I think it would take. That's like the number one way they can make this happen is everybody takes a little bit less for the next 6 years. And once again, what does less mean, right? When the CFP expands and when the NCAA tournament physically it's inevitably going to expand too, and you add on bowl games as well. You add more schools, maybe more go to bowl games. We'll see, obviously, how that works out. But when you add in more schools, does that revenue jump with the way things are heading with it to where you're like, all right, we're not too upset about taking that short-term loss in terms of distributing money because we are going to make it up in the end. It's worth it once again in 2031, which, look, guys, I know it seems like it's kind of far away. It's really not, right? I mean, we're negotiating right now in 2022, a deal that kicks in 2025. It's about 6 years away we are from, getting ready to negotiate the next deal. And if you're a 16-team league and you're one of the Power Four, and we'll see how things keep rolling, you kind of like your situation that you're in at that point in time. But that is kind of the number one path I see now is it would involve, if you want to go right now to add those teams, barring something different here, you'd have to distribute more money, and it would probably end up in a short-term loss in terms of what you were going to look at for potential long-term gain. But we've seen Brett Yormark. He is aggressive, and so that would kind of be maybe instructive about why they would go it now. A whole lot more angles to hit this from. We will be continuing to hit that, but that is kind of the path that opened up for me with this news. Once again, the big news here being ESPN will match per Power 5 edition in a pro rata situation if you add somebody else on. Fox, not all the way there, wondering what that gap is. Because once again, ESPN's paying the majority of the money. They have the big package. What would Fox do in this situation? What's the gap? And are the other schools okay with closing it if it means the conference looks better in 2031? And also, there's less competition in 2031. Once again, we really pitted the Big 12 against the Pac-12. That's kind of been the collision course here. If there's no Pac-12 or it looks drastically different, and we'll see how high level of competition would be if you took those schools away. It could be it's a calculated risk for sure. We'll see if Brett Yormark swings the fences. And also another part of this too is, the Pac-12 could come up with a television deal. That's 100% possible. The Pac-12 could come up with a television deal here that would make this a moot point, right? If they make so much per team where going and taking less money in the short term makes no sense for these schools, then they might not do it. Now, I think the one thing people are worried about if you're in the Pac-12 is you are worried about the poaching that could come from the Big Ten. Once again, it seems quiet on that front right now, but that's still in play. And so if you're talking about security, which conference feels the most secure right now, or I guess least secure, you'd have to say it's the Pac-12. They're sitting there without a deal. Another part of this too, I forgot to mention, is the Big 12 is guaranteed to be on linear television. They are on Fox. They're on ESPN. They're on those places. Now, it could change because I know ESPN wants to go direct to consumer, so they want to go around the cable, just send it straight to you. But ESPN is still ESPN. That brand carries a lot of weight, and so that's important. Fox still carries a lot of weight. Amazon college football is a journey into the unknown in terms of production value, because the NFL is one thing in terms of viewership, in terms of exposure, what it does for recruiting. It's all unknown. So these are all the factors being weighed, right? The Big 12 is weighing short-term loss for long-term gain, maybe to get rid of a opponent. The Pac-12 is trying to weigh short-term deal, long-term security, how much money they can get. These Pac-12 teams are going to have to weigh, well, the Big 12 looks more secure. Also, I like where their games are being shown, ESPN and Fox. And do they want to be on streamers? So the options have now opened up. But I will say, with this pro rata not being all the way around matched, it's not all the way even, it does create a bit of a more difficult situation. It's not just an easy pull. going back to circle around and finish off this conversation, if Fox and ESPN had agreed to match $31.6 million in television revenue per school added, just to make that sum total, it's a pretty easy evaluation for those Pac-12 schools, right? You look at what's being offered to them and what the Big 12 offers, and is it worth it to you? Now, if you have to make sure, if everybody's taking a little bit less than that and the Pac-12 can get around that or more than that, that becomes an easier decision. Once again, I think it's a really short-term deal. We see the Pac-12 ink. I don't think it closes the door on expansion at all for the Big 12. But I think as it sits right now, the Big 12's avenue to getting more Power 5 teams is a challenging one, but it is one that is available. And I think this pro rata clause shows you that path. But I'm just wondering if the Pac, and I don't know about the numbers right now for the Pac-12. John Oran's been pretty high from the Sports Business Journal, who broke the news with the Big 12, about the Pac-12's value. I don't have enough information on that. From what it sounds like, though, they're going to be enough in the ballpark this round to make it okay. But that's all that, once again, is still to be figured out. But there is an avenue now for the Big 12 to add Power 5 schools. We know what it looks like. And maybe one more part of this, if Brett Yormark can do some convincing of Fox to get them on board to, say, hey, give us a little more here, in terms of matching, that'd be an interesting situation. But it's all really exciting. I thought this was a huge piece of news that we had to talk about because this pro rata clause does kind of lay out what it would look like for them to add another team and the financial situation it would put them in. Short-term deal, 6 years, not going to hamstring you for a long time, but it is a short-term loss. That you're wondering what that makes it look like if you're stacking them up then against the Pac-12. So I would say overall, pathway is clear now for adding a team, but I would say because it's going to lessen the value of the league for each team for the league, it is an advantage for the Pac-12 in this situation because it would then lower that target for each team to make money with, right? All right, well, if each team now it went from 31.6 to let's just say 28 per year in terms of television revenue, and that's what we have to eclipse. We have to eclipse 28. That becomes a lot easier. That becomes easier, obviously, than it is for to do 31.6. So that is kind of the math now that is involved. Don't have the specific numbers, right? We don't have that about what portions being paid out by who, and so that's part of this. I wish we could figure out. Maybe with John Oren and Andrew Marchand will have some more info on that. All right, let's hit now the college football playoff rankings from last night. The first rankings of the season came out yesterday. Taking a look right now at these. Tennessee, Ohio State, Georgia, and Clemson, your top four. Michigan 5, Bama 5, Bama 5, Bama 6, TCU 7, Oregon 8, USC 9, LSU 10, Ole Miss 11, UCLA 12, Kansas State 13, Utah 14, Penn State 15, Illinois 16, Carolina is 17, Oklahoma State is 18, Tulane 19, Syracuse 20, Wake Forest is 21, State is 22, NC State that is, Oregon State is 23, Texas 24, and UCF is number 25. So the big conversation, I think, in our neck of the woods has come down to really that 6 and that 7 spot. Alabama ahead of TCU. And we saw a comment made, Boo Corrigan made a comment about how and why that TCU is behind Alabama. And I thought that comment was very, very telling because it really was a whole lot of nothing. What Boo Corrigan basically said, and this explanation, Ross Dellinger tweeted this out, this is also on television as well. He basically said, we're looking for balanced teams, offense and defense. They've gotten behind in games. Well, that to me is a bad excuse because they've gotten behind in games and they've won all those games. Alabama has gotten behind in games. They have not won all of those games. TCU has played close games. They played a very close game against Kansas. It was a close game. They won by 7. They played a close game with Kansas State, won by 10. They played a close game with Oklahoma State, won by, 3 in overtime, right? They played a close game with West Virginia, won by 10. Sure, they're playing close games. They're winning all those games. Alabama has played close games as well. They have not won all of them. They beat Texas in a close game. They beat Texas A&M in a close game, which is not that impressive. And they beat Tennessee, or they lost Tennessee, in a close game. Well, a loss is a loss, right? So we're talking about, well, some teams have close games. Some teams have, not close games. Sure, Alabama's had a few more blowouts along the way, but I mean, it's not like TCU's not had any, right? They did blow out Colorado in the end of that game. That Colorado's bad, but they did anyway. I mean, they're basically equivalent to Vanderbilt. They did blow out SMU. They, no, and it ends up being 8 points. It's not blowout, but they paced that game. Let's be honest, they're in control. They blew out Oklahoma. That's for damn sure, right? That was a cakewalk in the park for them in that game. So if you're looking at that, those resumes, like, who played closer games, sure, TCU's played a few more closer games, but are we talking about who's playing close games now? They won. We know TCU's defense is flawed, sure, but they played a bunch of ranked teams. And look, not in the committee's rankings, obviously. It's not fair, but Kansas was ranked at the time. They beat them. Oklahoma was ranked at the time. That was not a football game. That was a dog walking. That was a boat racing, right? Kansas State was ranked. They beat them. Oklahoma State was a top 10 team. They beat them. So they should be rewarded for running that gauntlet, and they're behind a team with one loss. Now, albeit it's the number one team in the country in the Alabama Crimson Tide. So there is that consideration, the Tennessee Volunteers. But in that situation, that consideration, why is that? Why are they being put ahead? Also with opportunities against number 10 LSU, number 11 Ole Miss, like it would seem now hard for TCU to jump an undefeated team, although they've got difficult games left. I know Texas is ranked, and that's going to help TCU, but the problem is Texas being ranked right now almost helps Alabama's evaluation more than it helps TCU. Why? Because Alabama already owns that win over Texas. And look, a lot of this stuff will become a moot point. That's not really what we're talking about here, though, right now. Just because down the line it might not be a relevant point does not mean that right now it is not a relevant point. The ends justifying the means, all that kind of stuff, right? It's some of these conversations for postseasons in college sports kind of remind me in the NCAA tournament. I'll use a team. My parents both went to VCU. They're both fans of the VCU Rams. And I had season tickets the other went to the Final Four. They were, not bragging, or cheap seats. That team wasn't good though. That team was not very good. Now, they really put their foot on the pedal and beat some really good basketball teams in the NCAA tournament. That was a team that on Selection Sunday didn't even meet because they didn't think they were going to get in. And they shouldn't have gotten in. And they got in, good for them making the most of it. But just because they made the Final Four does not mean that was an NCAA tournament team during the season. We have to evaluate you off what your resume is. Also, we're talking balance here. How balanced the team is committing a ton of penalties. How balanced is a team that seems very reliant on two offensive players in Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs for a majority of what you're doing, right? How balanced is a team that on defense seems questionable? They played one of the best offenses in the country, obviously, but gave up a 50 spot in that game. So you have to ask yourself, like, how balanced is it really when it seems like what's happening is the Alabama is really depending on, individual players to make things happen. I mean, Bryce Young goes out there and, solely wins them that game against Texas, right? That game was ugly against Texas A&M. I know, obviously, Bryce Young not playing all of it, whatever, too. Or I forgot if he played in that game. I'm not even sure. It doesn't really matter. That game was close. And it's Alabama. It's always a machine, whatever it is. Not saying Alabama's not good. They probably deserve to be the 7th ranked team in the country. But this is not a question of, hey, would Team X beat Team Y on a neutral field? That's not what we're doing here. We're stacking up resumes. Resumes are what we have to go off of. And right now, I think it's not like it's some country mile, but I think you can make the argument pretty clearly that TCU's got a better resume as it sits right now compared to an Alabama. Also want to highlight too, an LSU being number 10, guys. That's a farce. And that's just ESPN TV propaganda. I don't like being this guy. I'm not normally this person. I'm never like to blame, once again, never to blame the media guy. LSU's lost to FSU and got curb stomped, and FSU's fine and got curb stomped, absolutely curb stomped in their game that they had against Tennessee. UCLA's had a really good season. UCLA should be ahead of them. I'm not even sure if Ole Miss is that good. I might even put Ole Miss. Well, obviously they played a head-to-head, but LSU's got the 2 losses. You know what I mean? LSU belongs with where Kansas State is, where Utah is, where Penn State is, with those 2 lost teams right now. I know they look a lot better, but to me, that ranking was done really to prop up the matchup this week between LSU and Alabama, more so than a statement of how good LSU has been. Oklahoma State, nice to see they didn't drop too far. I think Mike Gundy's getting a lot of respect, and I feel like last week's game was kind of just a throwaway, to be honest. And they could have put them even further down, but no, they're still in the top 20. Texas at number 24 is interesting. That feels like, once again, like this is mentioned. I was listening to Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast. He made a great point, and this was been said by Heather Dinich sometimes. It's also been said by Adam Rittenberg. Like, no team has ever gone from higher than 16 in the initial rankings to go and win the college football playoff. It's just not happened before. And really what they do with those back part of the rankings, it makes those back part of the rankings obsolete in some ways. Well, what they do with that back part of the ranking is they really use that as a kind of tool to justify some of what's happening up ahead, right? They use that those rankings to justify what's happening with, Alabama beat Texas. So they're going to be, it's going to justify them being up ahead. They got the LSU games that'll just help justify them. They got a top 10 win, staying ahead of a TCU, and Ole Miss coming up there too, top 11 team. They got trounced pretty good. It was a 25-point loss they took against LSU, and they're just right there behind them. And once again, if we're evaluating those 2 teams pretty evenly, LSU and Ole Miss, then why, if we think they're pretty even, we're just discounting loss at this point, right? That's what we're doing. We're discounting a second LSU loss and basically looking at those teams as even, which is unfair. But I think if you're doing that, you should evaluate Kansas State, who's also a 2-loss team, and put them higher. I think that's something that we're doing. So we're kind of just throwing out losses here for the sake of just doing it. It feels like, I don't know. This stuff gets me riled up. Not always sure it makes 110% sense, but it frustrates me. For TCU, though, the goal is pretty simple. I mean, just keep winning, right? The more you win, the better off you'll be down the stretch. They've got games against Texas Tech, Baylor, Texas, all left in the schedule. Plus, running the table would require them beating another ranked team in the Big 12 championship game. So obviously, another potential notch in your belt, and beating a team a second time too is not too bad. So that's where we're at on that front. All right, that will do it for today's show. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at LOBig12. Follow me at @JoshNeighbors_. Find the show wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Also, once again, one more note on this. LSU, the whole point, I know I was kind of contradicting myself with the LSU Ole Miss thing. They should not be ranked there. They just should. It's SEC bias, my whole point. It's like 2-loss team is ahead of a 1-loss team. 1-loss team should be ahead because they played. We're going to stick them together, and everybody else has to, suck it that is behind us. No, they shouldn't be doing that. All right. Once again, that'll do it for today's show. Follow us on Twitter at LOBig12. Find me at JoshNeighbors_. Find the show wherever your podcast and on YouTube as well. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.